Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I'm seeing that it's just afternoon, so I'm going to go ahead and get started, and folks can join us as we do these introductions. But it looks like there's a good number of folks already with us. Um, so thank you for being with us for this month's Your Hour with APA Virginia, which is generously sponsored by our friends over at the Berkeley Group, um, longtime partners of the series. Today we have Fairfax County folks to present manufactured housing, owned home, rented land, resident-focused planning and zoning strategies for manufactured housing communities. And I know that our speakers are going to further introduce themselves after I kind of hand it over and wrap up some housekeeping items, but I just did want to note out the CM number for this webinar here. I'll also put it in the chat with the link to the actual CM page on the APA site. So this is our chapter website page where you can find all information about the webinar series. That would be under, oops, I'm sorry. I think it might be under Connect with APA Virginia, or Professional Development. I might have the tab wrong at the minute, but I will make sure that that is posted on our um, in the chat in just a moment. Some logistical items, we really encourage questions. If you could submit your questions through the Q&A, that would be super helpful. We'll also leave the chat box open if there's ever an opportunity for any open-ended remarks. And of course, you can pose your questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A, but if you'd prefer to ask your question out loud once we get to the formal Q&A portions of the webinar, you're welcome to use the raise hand feature to request to be unmuted. Um, let me, oh, I also wanted to note that we're going to have some polling questions, and those will populate on your screen and they're fairly straightforward, but there may be an opportunity there if to use the chat as well. This webinar is being recorded. You might have been notified on your screens a moment ago. So some other things that I'll put in the chat in just a moment will include the link to our YouTube page where you can find all previously recorded webinars in the series and where you'll find this one in the coming days, that chapter website that I mentioned, and then I will also share our conference website. Quick plug for our conference that early bird rates are closing on July 9th. So take advantage of those, and I hope to see you all in Danville in July. I think that about covers it for logistical items. If you have any other questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A or direct message me. But otherwise, I will hand it over to Fairfax County and Ivana, who will get us started. Thanks everyone for being with us.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our presentation, Own Home, Rented Land, Resident-Focused Planning and Zoning Strategies for Manufactured Housing Communities. My name is Ivana Escobar, and I serve as the Manufactured Housing Coordinator for Fairfax County Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm joined today by my colleagues from the Department of Planning and Development. Today, we will review Fairfax County efforts to understand conditions in manufactured housing communities and to work with residents to preserve this unique and diminishing source of affordable housing through comprehensive planning and zoning. Our approach centers on three components: new policy development, zoning reforms, and relocation guidelines, with a broad initiative to raise awareness of the challenges residents face, connect them with essential resources, and elevate their voices in decision-making. By the end of this session, you'll be better equipped to apply inclusive resident-centered community engagement in your own practice. For today's agenda, we've organized the presentation into four parts. We'll begin with an overview of manufactured housing and preservation needs, then walk through the Comprehensive Plan Amendment, related zoning ordinance and state code changes, and finally, the relocation guidelines. We'll pause after each major section for questions and discussion. Before we begin our presentation, we would like to understand the purpose of your attendance. Please respond to the two poll questions displayed on your screen.
So first up, I will go ahead and launch the first poll. What primary objective best describes your reason for attending this webinar? And all attendees should see that on your screen. And if you happen to not see that on your screen, you're welcome to type it in the chat. And I will wait until we're at about 80% participation before I close the poll. All right. Ivana, can you see those results?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to everyone. And I'm glad to see that there's a general consensus of general professional and personal interest in affordable housing.
Great. Now I will go ahead and launch the next poll. Do you work in or with a jurisdiction that currently allows or utilizes manufactured housing? Again, that should be on your screen, but if for whatever reason it may not be, feel free to put it in the chat. Alrighty, there you go, Ivana.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for answering. Next slide, please. In Fairfax County, all manufactured housing communities have a unique form of home ownership, where residents own the home but rent the land beneath it. This split ownership model creates different risks than traditional home ownership. These homes are significantly more affordable than detached homes and often offer more space than apartments, which is why many working families rely on them. Additionally, manufactured homes are the only housing type built to a federal building code that governs design and construction to ensure safety and quality. But this affordability comes with vulnerability. These communities face multi-phase challenges, including escalating land values, regulatory constraints, and vulnerability to environmental hazards such as flooding, storms, and extreme heat. Residents in manufactured housing communities experience disproportionate impacts from these challenges because of limited income and language barriers. In certain instances, homes are no longer movable due to their age and condition, and attempts to relocate them may result in additional damage, thereby complicating the displacement. Fairfax County covers about 400 square miles and is located just 10 miles from Washington, D.C. It has a population of 1.2 million and more than 400,000 housing units, ranging from single-family homes in agriculture areas to 400-foot high-rise buildings near metro stations. Last year, the average price for a single-family home was $770,000. A recent housing needs assessment found that the county will need more than 40,000 additional housing units over the next decade. Together, these factors underscore the urgent need to preserve existing affordable housing options in Fairfax County. Fairfax County is home to 7 manufactured housing communities totaling more than 1,700 units, several which are more than 50 years old. Most manufactured housing communities operate at full capacity because many households remain in these homes long term, investing significantly to accommodate their family growth. 4 of these communities are owned by national companies, 2 are locally owned, and 1 is owned by the Fairfax County Redevelopment Housing Authority. In 2020, the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors established a goal of no net loss of existing affordable housing, as well as a new production goal of 10,000 new affordable units by 2034. The board also created the Affordable Housing Preservation Task Force to conduct a county-wide assessment of strategies to preserve affordable rental housing, particularly those types at risk of disappearing. The task force identified manufactured housing as a critical preservation priority, and these communities provide naturally occurring and deeply affordable homes for many working families. Among its recommendations, the task force advised the board to establish a separate manufactured housing task force to serve as a forum for issues related to manufactured home preservation and redevelopment. In 2021, the board established the Manufactured Housing Task Force to address the unique challenges faced by the county's 7 manufactured housing communities. The task force comprised of manufactured housing residents, property owners and managers, county staff, and community stakeholders. The task force conducted a comprehensive analysis and developed 34 strategic recommendations addressing zoning, infrastructure, resident protection, language access, and long-term preservation. Additionally, the task force recommended establishing a manufactured housing coordinator position to oversee the related manufactured housing community outreach and engagement. In 2022, the board adopted the recommendations of the Manufactured Housing Task Force. These measures were further intended to provide critical support to help families achieve long-term stability. Next, my colleague Leah Neubauer will present on the Manufactured Housing Plan Amendment.
Thanks, Ivana, for that background and more information how we got to this point. Like Ivana said, I'm Leah Niebauer. I'm a planner with the Planning Division, and I focus on comprehensive plan amendments, including the Comprehensive Plan Countywide Policy Update for Manufactured Housing. So Virginia's General Assembly has long flagged challenges around affordable housing, including manufactured housing communities. And so in 2021, the state adopted legislation which requires any comprehensive plan amendment after July 1st of 2021 to include strategies that promote manufactured housing as affordable housing. And so this includes preserving existing communities, creating new communities, and allowing manufactured home subdivisions. And so this enabling authority aligned directly with Fairfax County's comprehensive plan work, giving us the ability to create tools to proactively plan for manufactured housing communities. So out of the 34 total recommendations produced by the Manufactured Housing Task Force, 3 of them require changes to the comprehensive plan itself. And so these 3 recommendations became the foundation for the plan amendment we're discussing today. And so the first recommendation was to explicitly define manufactured housing communities within the comprehensive plan. Previously, the plan referenced manufactured housing communities, but it didn't provide a clear definition or formally recognize them as an important source of affordable housing. Then the second recommendation was to review and clarify all area plan guidance affecting each of the 7 communities. So this was important because in many cases, the plan language was outdated or inconsistent or didn't reflect the existing conditions. And if redevelopment was to occur, there wasn't a strategy for achieving a no net loss of affordable housing. And then the third recommendation called for strengthening the policy plan so that manufactured housing communities are afforded the same level of protection as any other existing residential neighborhood. And so this recommendation ensures that all policies recognize them as communities that should be preserved, supported, and planned with the same level of foresight as other residential areas. So, in close collaboration with housing and planning departments, staff carried out an extensive multi-phase outreach effort that engaged every major stakeholder connected to the county's 7 manufactured housing communities. We met directly with property owners and managers at each of the communities. We held community meetings to meet the residents tailored to each individual neighborhood and worked closely with advocates, nonprofit partners, and the Manufactured Housing Roundtable. And this group established to find solutions to issues related to manufactured housing. So they were a key component as well. Staff also briefed the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors land use committees throughout the process to ensure alignment at each stage. And then there was a second round of engagement that was conducted after the draft plan text, the zoning ordinance amendment, and the relocation guidelines were published. And then all materials were provided in both Spanish and English, which was a key component to the outreach. And then both in-person and virtual options were also made available to maximize access. And then to reduce barriers, the outreach strategy included multilingual interpretation and translation, both in verbal and in written material at every session that we had. And then transportation, childcare, providing food, and on-site support services were also provided in order to help reduce obstacles to participation. And then staff also use social media, WhatsApp, community networks, and door-to-door notifications to reach households who may not typically engage in county processes. So as part of the feedback that we received, property owners told us that at the time, that they're not pursuing redevelopment or sale of the communities and emphasized their investments and concerns about permitted additions and how they could work towards getting them working with the residents. And then one owner did express concerns about potential impacts on property values. And then from the residents' side, residents supported preservation strategies but still feared displacement, especially in commercially and industrially zoned communities. They also stressed the need for ownership opportunities and then early involvement in redevelopment discussions and improvements to their existing infrastructure, such as safety, lighting, and the big concerns of the increasing rents that they faced. So the comprehensive plan previously included an appendix called Guidelines for Mobile Home Retention, but it did not provide preservation strategies for existing manufactured housing communities or guidance on maintaining long-term affordability. So as part of the newly adopted amendment, that appendix was removed and replaced with a new objective within the housing element. And then the new objective and associated policies strengthen the county's approach to preserving manufactured housing communities by supporting potential infrastructure improvements to improve health, safety, and sustainability, also encouraging manufactured housing communities that are currently zoned for commercial use to rezone to residential manufactured home parks district, or use a special exception to reduce nonconformities, um, which zoning will talk more about. And then also within the guidance, promoting opportunities for resident-led or nonprofit acquisition when communities are offered for sale. And policies were also added to ensure that if redevelopment did occur, the existing affordability levels are preserved with the goal of one-for-one replacement, and that residents are relocated back on site to the extent feasible in affordable committed units. And then developers are expected to consult with the Department of Housing and Community Development early in the process and conduct an affordability analysis, and then follow the county's manufactured housing relocation guidelines when relocation is required, which Ivana will talk more about in later presentation. And then where redevelopment or environmental hazards, such as flooding, necessitate relocation, the adopted policy also calls for identifying land to support relocation and the preservation of long-term affordability, while also facilitating opportunities for more traditional homes of affordable home ownership. So implementation of the adopted comprehensive plan amendment really relies on several coordinated efforts that work together to support the long-term preservation of manufactured housing communities. The adopted policy plan updates added new guidance in the housing element, which establishes the goal of preserving affordability and achieving one-for-one replacement when redevelopment occurs. And then the zoning ordinance amendment and manufactured housing relocation guidelines, which you'll hear about shortly. Those are also key components to implementation. And then also implementation includes ongoing monitoring of redevelopment proposals to ensure that they comply with the new objective, particularly the affordability analysis and the goal of one-for-one replacement, as well as the relocation requirements. And so together, these tools really create a coordinated long-term framework for preserving these communities and protecting the residents who really rely on them. So now I'll take a second before we get into the zoning discussion, just to see if we have any questions that are really geared towards the comprehensive plan amendment. And if we don't get, if you think of questions later on, we'll also take questions at the very end of the presentation, because I know we have zoning amendment to also go through, as well as the relocation guidelines.
Leah, I am
Mhm.
not seeing any questions in the Q&A at the moment.
Okay, great.
Um, but again, folks, we're breaking up this presentation into multiple parts, so feel free to put those questions in as you think of them. Alrighty, I will pass it back over.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Leah. My name is Jen. I'm with the Zoning Administration Division, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the zoning amendment we passed in coordination with the comp plan and the relocation guidelines. So this was a multi-department effort, and this is the zoning piece of it. So our goal with the zoning amendment is, in addition to supporting the preservation of the parks, was mainly to update the standards that our zoning has that were unchanged from the 1978 ordinance. We wanted to address a lot of long-standing nonconformities that exist in the park, like density and setback, that largely exist because a lot of the parks are older than 1978. They were developed either before that set of standards or even before some standards existed, like before we had a density maximum. We also overall, of course, want to balance safety needs and the community's desires. Slide, please. So for the zoning of the parks, we have 7 parks again, as Leah mentioned, and we have a residential manufactured home park zoning district, but only 3 of the parks were actually zoned to that RMHP district. The other 4 were zoned to commercial and industrial districts, which meant they were legally non-conforming. As far as our standards versus existing conditions, again, a lot of the parks were developed in the 40s and 50s. And so things like density, they were over the allowed density. They didn't quite meet the setbacks that are in the ordinance. And the distances between the homes on the ground were not really what our ordinance had stated. Slide, please. So again, on those density and distances, almost all of the parks were over the allowed density, and which in part was due again to the fact that the parks were built before we had density requirements for mobile home parks. And then in some cases, unfortunately, some of the homes were placed too close to one another. And of course, that creates a lot of safety and maintenance issues. Some of the parks were in really good shape and the homes have safe distances, whereas there were a few parks where the houses were very, very close together. And those 2 pictures on the side were from one of our parks, Harmony Mobile Home Park. Slide, please. So one of those safety issues, of course, is fire. So while each manufactured home does meet the Housing and Urban Development Code, the HUD code, of course, there is fire risk, and there's additional fire risk when like home additions and decks brought those homes even closer together than is safe. So the picture on the left is of a fire from just last year at one of the parks. And so thankfully that fire was able to be put out. No one was hurt, no humans or animals. And the fire was put out before the neighboring house caught. But of course, you can see that facade of the neighbor's property was really badly scorched. And the home with the fire itself was completely destroyed and needs to be rebuilt. So when we were looking at rewriting these zoning standards, we had pretty extensive conversations with the fire marshal and building officials to not only talk about what is technically required, but also what is practically safe. What setbacks from the road are needed for a fire truck to be able to clear some of these tighter roads and these smaller parks. How much time does it take to get from the entrance of a park all the way through to the deepest part of the park? And then what distances do we need to allow for enough time for fire department to get through to all parts of the park and give folks enough time to put out that fire. So that helped advise a lot of the minimum distance conversations we had, as well as community feedback, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Slide, please. So what are some of the standard changes that we implemented? So we increased the allowed density, not in an effort to actually increase the density on the ground, but to just acknowledge the existing densities in the parks. So we did a little spatial exercise in thinking about how many homes can we actually fit on an acre if we're maintaining a safe distance. And we came to a number of 10 dwelling units an acre, which brought 5 out of the 7 parks into conformance. So much better than what we had before. We also reduced the periphery setbacks. So those are just the setbacks around the edge of the property to reflect those existing conditions. And we slightly reduced the minimum distance required between the homes to accommodate for additions and again, what was existing on site. But we also wanted to balance having space for the residents. And that was a big piece of the feedback we received, was that residents did not want to get any tighter to their neighbors than they already were. We also increased the parking rate very slightly just to match other single-family detached districts. And then we introduced 2 new application types, a special permit and a special exception. And the special permit was for individual homeowners to apply to reduce the distance between their homes to their neighbors to allow, for a deck or an addition. And those are reviewed on an individual case-by-case basis to ensure that, it is still a safe distance, it meets the minimum building code, and spatially it works in that specific scenario. We also have a new special exception for the park owners to kind of wholesale address some of those nonconformities all around the park. Slide, please. So another piece of the zoning puzzle was floodplain. So generally, zoning ordinance won't allow construction in the floodplain, but in our case, there were a number of homes that already existed within the floodplain. We had a count of about 154 that were located in the floodplain. And so Virginia State Code does allow for an existing manufactured home to be replaced. So we updated our zoning language to reflect that permission as long as the home is elevated. So as you can imagine, manufactured homes are at a pretty significant risk compared to homes, typical home with a foundation. So as with typical construction, we do allow, or we do require that the home is elevated above base flood elevation. So you can see that in the lower picture there. Some of us attended a really helpful construction and building workshop that had some info on elevating a manufactured home and showing how it's possible, specifically with a new home, to kind of build it on these stilts to make sure that residents are safe in the case of flooding. Slide, please. So to touch on outreach a little bit more, again, we did outreach all together with the comp plan and relocation guideline effort. And for the zoning piece, we did specifically solicit feedback from residents on their preferred minimum separation distance between homes, which is a specific change that really affects people on the ground. So we did want to get people's opinion based on their lived experience and their neighborhood. And a majority of those participating did prefer to maintain the current requirement of 15 feet between homes, despite some construction kind of saying otherwise, construction getting a little bit closer to their neighbors. But of course, we want to respect that community determination. So that is why we pretty much maintained the existing distance with a slight reduction to allow for some of those additions and decks. Slide, please. And then last, I just wanted to highlight the work that is done after an amendment is finalized. So of course, once our language is finalized, we do want to get back to the community, provide them info on those changes. And also, we did learn quite a lot about what residents needed through the outreach process and what they were struggling with. And that primarily was that people were having trouble through the permitting process, knowing when a permit is needed, as well as, bilingual guidance. Some miscommunications or misunderstandings with property management, in that, people had kind of understood that as long as they got permission from property management, they could kind of build the addition or the deck that they wanted, not understanding, not knowing that they also needed a permit from the county. So we are coming back to the community with this flyer, this bilingual flyer, that is meant to provide people guidance on which permit do you need and when, what are the new standards for separation, and then what are the steps that you need to take in order to get that permit, and what kind of guidance is available. So we in DPD have, bilingual support. We have some interpreters on the line, as well as in person, to provide that permitting assistance. And that's all I have. And then we have some questions. I see some questions in the chat. Feel free to chime in with more. Let's see. We have a question. Who would absorb the cost of elevating the existing home? So the homeowner does currently need to pay for that elevation of the home. But it's, again, not required unless there is a new manufactured home that's replacing the existing home.
And it looks like, excuse me, there are two other questions in the Q&A. So an anonymous attendee asks, how was the increased parking requirement accommodated on site?
So the increase in parking only comes into effect if the park is to reconfigure in some way. Like if they needed to submit a new site plan, they wanted to put in a new playground, or they wanted to add more homes or change their location or change their parking designation, then that increase would kick in. So that's a good observation, that it really only takes effect if either there's a new park, which is very unlikely, or the park reconfigures. I will note that many of the parks that exist already kind of meet that minimum parking requirement. They have an excess of parking in terms of our standards, in relation to our standards. So it's just to kind of ensure that any changes in the park don't go below the new rate being two spaces per dwelling unit.
Thanks, Jen. Alex Long asks how to address issue of grandfathering or vested rights of high density.
So the increased density in our case already existed kind of, I guess they were considered legally non-conforming. And again, with the state code allowing existing manufactured homes to be replaced, that kind of fully encompasses the grandfathering issue, in that we can't, if they already exist at the time, we can't require that they be removed in order to meet the density.
Okay, thank you. And David Levy asks, would all zoning changes be only be only for manufactured communities? Or would any also apply to individual manufactured homes that are not in communities? And then he says, a related question, did you also look at zoning as it applies to individual units that are not in communities or parks?
Our primary goal for this amendment was manufactured homes in the parks. I think some of our changes may have affected individual homes, but largely in the county, most of the units exist within parks. Otherwise, we do just allow one home per parcel. And so in that case, they would need to meet the district regulations for the district they exist in. They'd meet the setbacks. And then with the new state code change that recently passed, we are working on another zoning amendment, kind of tack those state code changes on, that does allow a single manufactured home on each lot in any district that a site-built home is allowed on.
Thank you. And it looks like Eric Sanchez has a question in the chat. He says he may have missed this, but for future comp plans, did you designate these areas for multifamily zoning or was it another zoning type? If so, why?
So we did end up designating them for manufactured housing in the comp plan. They're already designated. And on the comprehensive plan, land use plan map, they're designated with an MH symbol, to signify that it's manufactured housing, and not specifically for multifamily.
Thanks, Leah.
Mhm.
It looks like those are the questions as of right now, and we may have more come in later, but I will hand it over.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone again. My name is Ivana Escobar, and I'm the Manufactured Housing Coordinator for the Department of Housing and Community Development. I will be presenting today on the Manufactured Housing Relocation Guidelines. The Manufactured Housing Task Force recommended the development of the relocation guidelines to ensure that benefits and supports are available to homeowners and renters in the event of community redevelopment for alternative uses. These guidelines are intended to minimize disruption and maximize opportunities and choices for affected residents. These guidelines are aligned with the Federal Uniform Relocation Act, Virginia Housing Guidance, and the Manufactured Home Lot Rental Act, and they do not replace or succeed any state or federal requirements. In this portion of the presentation, we'll walk through the manufactured housing relocation guidelines, which address both on-site and off-site relocation, outline owner responsibilities, and describe the types of assistance and benefits available to residents, including eligibility criteria to both temporary and permanent relocation support. During our outreach, we asked residents what they would need if their community were redeveloped. And they have identified three primary relocation needs. First, they want help finding options, whether it is in another manufactured home community, suitable land, or on-site relocation if that's possible. Second, they emphasize the need for financial assistance when a home cannot be moved. And third, they stress the importance of having access to alternative housing that is affordable, safe, and appropriate for their households. Owner, as used in these guidelines, refers to property owner, developer, or project applicant. These guidelines provide direction to owners in supporting manufactured housing residents who are facing displacement. Depending on the specific project and associated relocation plan, owners may be responsible for offering temporary or permanent housing options. Owner responsibilities include, but are not limited to, proactively engaging and clearing communication with residents, developing a comprehensive relocation plan and property profile, providing relocation assistance, service, and appropriate supports, and coordinating closely with Fairfax County throughout the relocation process. Relocation assistance is intended for manufactured housing homeowners who are displaced from a manufactured home or a manufactured home community and have a rental agreement with the community owner. Subtenants who do not have a lease are not eligible for this assistance. Eligible residents receive relocation benefits on a per unit basis rather than a per household member. For residents living in recreational vehicles, relocation benefits and services will be determined on a case-by-case basis. For relocation assistance and services, the owner should provide staff dedicated to supporting residents undergoing relocation. Whether resident demographics indicate a need, staff should be multilingual and provide access to language interpretation to ensure communication in the resident preferred language. Owners should offer the following, but are not limited to, services for both temporary and permanent relocation. Current listings within the county or neighboring jurisdictions are compatible and available vacant pad sites, vacant manufactured housing units, and vacant affordable multifamily units. Assistance with assembling, moving, and reassembling any attached accessories and anchoring of the unit. Coordination of demolition of manufactured housing units that cannot be relocated. For temporary relocation assistance is available to manufactured housing homeowners when their unit is returning to the property. Assistance may include moving services, reimbursement for utility transfer costs and related expenses, or a one-time payment if the unit cannot be relocated. For permanent relocation assistance, the owner should provide permanent relocation benefits to eligible manufactured housing homeowners if the manufactured home meets any of the following criteria: built prior to 1976, inability to relocate without sustainable damage or unreasonable costs, or inability to relocate due to the lack of comparable replacement pad site based on the pad size within a 50-mile radius. Manufactured housing homeowners will receive a one-time relocation payment required under the Virginia Manufactured Home Lot Rental Act. Homeowners are entitled to an additional contribution per unit for replacement housing or relocation expenses. This contribution must be equal to a fair market value of the manufactured home or a minimum of $22,000 for a multifamily manufactured home or $13,000 for a single section manufactured home, whichever is greater. This contribution may be used for purchase or rental of another dwelling unit and moving expenses. If applicable, a rental differential payment for households earning at or below 60% AMI. For lessons learned throughout our intensive outreach and engagement process, several lessons emerged that directly shaped the adopted Manufactured Housing Comprehensive Plan and zoning ordinance amendments, as well as the relocation guidelines. First, we learned that reducing participation barriers is essential. Meeting residents where they are, holding meetings in their communities or nearby community centers. Providing childcare, transportation, and language access was critical to ensuring equitable engagement. These supports made it possible for residents to fully participate and share their lived experience. We found that early transparent communication builds trust. Tailoring presentations and materials to be clear, relatable, and culturally relevant made a significant difference for participants, especially given the complexity of planning and zoning topics. Creating a safe space for open communication and dialogue encouraged meaningful feedback and ensured that residents felt heard throughout the process. Another important lesson is that infrastructure needs differ widely across the 7 manufactured housing communities. Some face aging utility or road conditions, while others struggle with flooding or drainage issues. These differences reinforce the need for a flexible preservation strategies rather than a one-fits-all approach. With the multi-generation ties and investments that residents have made, we've also heard a strong interest in ownership opportunities. Many residents expressed a desire for cooperative ownership models or nonprofit acquisition to secure long-term stability for their communities. Preserving manufactured housing communities requires multiple coordinated tools. No single strategies, whether zoning, policy, or relocation support, can address all needs. And we thank you for your time, and now we will open for questions for the manufactured housing relocation guidelines.
It looks like we have a question from Jeffrey Harvey in the Q&A. Jeffrey asks says, it was stated that most manufactured home parks were developed prior to 1978. It's likely that they were developed prior to required stormwater management measures. Were the new stormwater requirements or open space requirements for new development of these parks? Were there, maybe, I think he meant to say.
Yep, that is a really good observation. So similarly to for the parking, new stormwater would only apply with a new site plan or for if they were to do the special exception or rezoning, then we would look at those regulations and apply that to that specific scenario only if there is a new application in.
Thank you. And I'm just looking and I'm not seeing any other. Oh, it looks like we just did get a question from Alexa Powell in the chat. Was there any consideration given to the codifying of the relocation guidelines to replace the one-to-one affordable units to provide support from the city to support either preservation or residents being given some priority in other affordable units in the event of redevelopment? The state's contribution requirements are small compared to actual market rate or affordable unit costs.
Yes, within our relocation guidelines, we developed the additional contribution. So we have that 22,000 for double wide homes and 13,000 for single wide homes to the additional relocation payment that's required by the state.
Thank you very much. Cameron Pittman asks, what sort of standards are placed on new mobile home parks? In Johnston County, North Carolina, sidewalks, parking, lighting, etc. are standards. Is that one that we could maybe get back to Cameron on, or?
So, hi, I'm Carmen Bishop. I work with Jen in zoning administration, and to be honest, I don't think we see any new mobile home parks or manufactured home parks happening in the near future. But I guess you never know. They would have to come in for a rezoning because there's no vacant lands zoned to that RMHP district that Jen talked about. But if they did come in, it would be that rezoning process followed by the site plan process, and they would have to meet all of the current standards and so forth. So that would include, everything that's required, as far as parking, lighting, and so forth, and stormwater.
Thank you, Carmen. Going back to the Q&A, I think I saw one come in. Another question from Jeffrey. Jeffrey asks, what entity ensures that relocation costs are paid by the park owner in a timely manner?
Yeah, so with Fairfax County, we do have a relocation specialist who will serve as a resource and will monitor the process, and that includes payment.
Thanks, Savannah. And I'm just keeping my eyes peeled in case we have any questions come in. In the meantime, I'm not sure if you all have any other remarks you'd like to make. Alrighty. Looks like that concludes the questions that we have at this time. I'm really glad that we were able to get to a few of those. I had flagged a question earlier on, just put it in my notes regarding the subtenants not being, if somebody could just maybe elaborate on the avenues for them. Um, I recall that there was just a mention um, of of restrictions on that front, and I just was hoping maybe for a little bit more information there.
Yeah, so for some tenants in the event of relocation, they would receive the assistance and services, but not the actual payments. And this aligns with the Virginia Manufactured Home Law Act that requires for homeowners who have a lease with the property management.
Thanks, Savannah. All right. Well, we do have a few minutes remaining, so as we sort of wrap things up, you're welcome to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A, of course. And I know that this team is more than happy to be a resource if you think of any questions in the next few days. Thank you so much to Fairfax County team for providing this information. Hopefully, this can help other planners throughout the state and in other jurisdictions go forth with their planning. Do you all have any final remarks before I just touch on some housekeeping items?
don't think so. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. All right, folks. Well, as mentioned at the front of this webinar, the recording will be posted to the APA Virginia YouTube page in the coming days, hopefully within 48 hours. I'm seeing some thank yous come in the chat and in some direct messages. So many thanks to our presenters for sharing their expertise here. And they continue to pour in. So thank you very much. The slide deck will also be sent out to all attendees in the coming days, and included in the slides are, of course, the contact information for our speakers. So if you do think of those questions or points of discussion, feel free to use that as a resource. But thank you everyone for being with us this afternoon, and stay tuned for the next webinar in the series next month, and come join us in Danville in July.